So we'll talk a little bit today about, there's a lot of conversations going on here and generally about, this resurgence in energy, a focus on energy and the nuclear renaissance, because it has been a very long time. Obviously here feels like a lot of the focus is on AI, but really it's been going on since we founded the company back in 2011, this necessity for kind of base load energy production. And despite all of the talk of demand growth, all of the support from policymakers around the world, the reality is there hasn't been a focus yet on, okay, where's the supply going to come from? And the big part of that supply is uranium. So as I said, the world is, I thought that was going to happen. Okay. So the world is committing back to nuclear energy, and it's driven by a need for this baseload power growth around the world. Without sustainable baseload power, you don't have increased standards of living. Very simple. And what we've seen is a lot of governments around the world now extending reactor lives, committing to new ones in the West. You have obviously new technologies being developed very rapidly, being funded very rapidly. And that includes in the United States, where we haven't had a new nuclear, or it's taken about 25 years to build a new nuclear plant in the US. And now there's been commitments for kind of 10 over the next 10 years, which is really what you need. You need to have some sort of, a pipeline basically to build them efficiently. A lot of people think nuclear reactors can't be built on time and on budget. They can. They are around most of the world. They haven't had a good track record in Western jurisdictions, and that's because you kind of build one every 25 years. So it's not very efficient. Decarbonization and grid stability are obviously still very much driving behind nuclear, because you have this AI demand now coming. And like we always see in metals and mining, and probably oil and gas, you have this period post-Fukushima in 2011 where no one wanted to talk about nuclear energy or uranium or anything. And then all of a sudden, time passes, no investment goes into the supply chain at all. And then all of a sudden, policymakers, people, industry want all of this growth. Well, you can invest lots of money in these reactors, you can build data centers everywhere, but if you don't have the power, it's not a strategy. You are doomed. So they are really doing it at scale, which is the first time since the 70s really, that you've seen this kind of nuclear demand growth. This thing is just very delayed. And so when we talk about this supply deficit in uranium, or if we focus on the uranium side of the equation, because some of you may not know, but in 2011, Fukushima happened. That was an accident in Japan, and basically it cratered the whole uranium industry for the better part of 10 years. And so what that meant was there was no money for exploration, development, anything. So to give you some idea of that, between, call it 2005, actually, it was probably 1999, there was essentially 3 new discoveries on planet Earth made in uranium since 1999. We made 2 of them as NextGen and ISO Energy, and then 1 made next door to us, actually, in Saskatchewan. Other than that, none. Yet, despite Fukushima happening and some ebbs and flows in nuclear energy demand, there's obviously just been this constant burn of uranium fuel. And so now we are where we are today, where we're in about a 60 million pound deficit today. 60 million pounds, to give you context, our mine is going to produce 30 million pounds a year. That's the largest mine that's ever been built in uranium's history. So you're talking about today, you need 2 of those. They don't exist to just fill the supply now. And then as you can see there, by 2040, you're needing about 10 new our projects being built. They don't exist. And there's another element of this whole supply chain which is very relevant, which is Mining takes a significant amount of time to bring something from discovery through to production. In our case, we made our discovery in 2014. It won't be producing until about 2030, 2031, and we didn't waste a day. I can tell you I was there the whole time. We did not waste a day. We didn't waste a minute. That's just how long these things take. So this is another big issue, obviously, geopolitics. Previous cycles in uranium, say the last cycle, which was from 2004 to 2011, when uranium prices went from $7 to $140 a pound. That was at a time where it was like peak globalization. It didn't matter. A uranium pound was created equal all over the world. Today, obviously, very, very different. And today you have extreme concentration of uranium supplies in places like Kazakhstan, Russia, Uzbekistan, Niger. So places that are not aligned with, certainly the United States. They make that very clear, but Canada, Western Europe, et cetera. So we don't have this marketplace anymore of globally available uranium. You have kind of a bifurcation of East and West uranium. And when you start to separate those two, the West has an even bigger problem than we had before, because they were relying very heavily, or have been relying very heavily, on these jurisdictions for their supply. And now they're gonna have to sort out, well, how do we rebalance things? How do we get uranium supply in the West? And obviously that takes time. It takes commitments from governments to make regulatory processes more efficient. It takes, in some cases, support for things like infrastructure that you may need in remote areas. But all of that stuff is in its infancy. And so you can see how this supply deficit is going nowhere anytime soon, even with our project coming online. You absolutely need to have higher prices. Uranium prices have gone from $17 in 2017 to just under $100 today. Zero supply response. No supply response. So you need significantly higher prices. And if we look back at the analogy of that 2004 to 2011 period, you had uranium prices go from 7 to 140. When you look at that on the demand side of the equation, you're talking just China. China was buying a big amount of uranium for their stockpile because they had these plans to build up to 10 reactors a year, which they are doing today. And then on the supply side of the equation, you had 2 big mines in Canada coming online. You had a balanced market going into that cycle, and you had Kazakhstan coming from 0 production all the way up to about 60 million pounds a year through that whole cycle, and with a strategy of just flooding the market with uranium, because it was like Soviet mentality of just go. When we take that comparison and look at today, on the demand side, it's much easier to point to places that are there's basically, 5 countries maybe in the world that are still slightly negative on nuclear. So demand is coming from all over the world, and it is much more sustainable because it's clearly a existential risk either for national security or economics or standard of living. But it's something that's here to stay, clearly. So you have a much more robust, sustainable, diversified demand side of the equation than you did in the last cycle. And then on the supply side, again, you're going into this cycle with a deficit. There is no Kazakhstan. Outside of us, there are no new large mines being built or being contemplated to be built or in a pipeline that's foreseeably developable. So you need, these higher prices have to be there for a long, long period of time to incentivize really exploration activity. That's what we need as an industry. I'm sure most of you probably know this by now, but despite rhetoric of the past, nuclear is extremely safe, extremely efficient, and there's lots of jurisdictions in the world where this is very evident. Obviously in China and the UAE, they've built reactors on time, on budget, at scale, so multiple units at a time, and that's the way to do it. And then, obviously with what's going on in the Middle East right now, it really highlights how strategic nuclear fuel really is and nuclear power really is, because if uranium prices go from $100 today to $500 tomorrow, you as end users or consumers of power are not going to feel it at all. Your power prices won't go up. Imagine that I mean, you see what's happening right now with European gas prices. You go to the pump, you see it. That doesn't happen in nuclear. And so I think this is kind of another one of those moments, like it was in the 70s with the 70s oil crisis, that really gave a big shot in the arm to nuclear. I think the same thing is unfortunately going to happen here. So what do we need? We need, building a mine is really about herding a ton of cats that are all going in different directions. We kind of need to do the same thing as an industry here. We need utilities to understand that the market has shifted and that they are in a situation where there's a duopoly market for them. That creates significantly higher risk than they are typically comfortable with, particularly when one of those two entities is Kazakhstan. We need, again, higher prices. We need the market to, both the uranium market, but also investor markets, to send durable price signals to industry that, hey, yeah, spend the money in exploration and we'll back you. And then in industry, and this is something that I think is still to come, I think it's still early, but like we saw with the OEMs in commodities like lithium and nickel and rare earths to some extent, they realize that they absolutely need these commodities, in that case for batteries, in this case for data centers, say, okay, we need power, whether it's behind the meter or not, we need power. Are we going to rely on an industry that hasn't sustained itself very well historically? You've had these massive cycles. Are we going to rely on that industry to continue to do that, or are we going to get involved ourselves? And I think that is still to come, and we are seeing signs of that certainly. So scale, jurisdiction, execution, and optimization of scarce resources will be what separates credible projects from past mistakes in our industry, in the mining side of the industry. So our mine is, as I said, we made the discovery back in 2014. It's in Saskatchewan in Canada. It's often called the Saudi Arabia of uranium. There's no place like it on Earth for these types of resources. There have historically, and again, we don't need to go into geology 101 here because I'm not qualified to do that, but it's not really important. But in Canada, what you've had is a situation where you've had these extremely high-grade uranium deposits, very large uranium deposits, but hosted in a very challenging underground technical setting. Very, very challenging. What we found in 2014 is something that has the same size and grade, but in a very competent underground setting. So that translates into significantly better economics, production flexibility, and ability to ramp up and down a mine very rapidly to meet market dynamics, environmental eliteness, and that's our big differentiator, really. We've just got our project approved after a 7-year process. So, again, there's been a lot of talk of, supporting mining and making regulatory processes more efficient. This was a very quick process for the federal government, but you can see how if we're in a supply deficit, we need new mines being built. 7 years to get something permitted that's as straightforward as this is. Again, you're talking about mining 2 of these rooms of dirt a day. That's all we're talking about. It's 1,300 tons per day, so it's literally 2 of these rooms a day. That takes 7 years to do. So there's room for improvement. There's an understanding federally that there's a need to do it, and now we just need to see the action. That does matter to us to some extent in that we've also made a new discovery 3.5 kilometers away from our Arrow deposit called Patterson Corridor East, which looks to be another Arrow. So we are doing our part to secure the supply in the West, but we can't do it alone. So we need more efficient regulatory processes and everything else I've spoken about. So our strategy with respect, because we do get a lot of questions, obviously it's a very large mine, and yes, we're in a deficit today, but it's a market, things change over time, maybe AI, whatever happens. What's our strategy with the 30 million pounds? And it's very, very simple. It's really just to produce and then determine what we sell. We just differentiate those two. Historically, miners just produce and sell, produce and sell. What we're saying is we're going to produce, we may not sell at all, depending on what the market price signals are at the time. And we have a massive ability to do that because it only costs us 4 million pounds. So if we produce 4 million pounds, we can produce at the mine 30 million pounds. And so we produce and sell 4 million pounds, we've broken even, and then we can determine how we want to sell. And this is not about taking market share or anything or anything like that. This is just a simple recognition that the uranium price has to be higher for longer to sustain the industry. We're not the only player. We don't want to be the only player. We just want to see the industry get to a level that supports itself because it's such a critical industry for this world, and the industry itself just hasn't done a very good job of that at all. And I mean, you just look at the price signals going back many decades. It goes up and it goes down, and it goes violently up and violently down. That suggests, a lack of responsible development by miners, a lack of acknowledgement of what the all-in cost of producing a pound of uranium is, and the incentives from the buyers of uranium at the times needed. There wasn't any utilities talking to us in any material way, in 2011 after we made the discovery and everything. Then they wait until uranium prices go from $17 to $100 a pound, and then they want to talk. That's good. It's a start, but we do need, as an industry, we do need them there when the industry needs them the most. The industry doesn't need them as much now. They obviously still need them, but it's not as much of a necessity. And then I think we just have a little video. Press play.
What if there was an energy source that could feed this growth without damaging this growth? That will give us this, as well as this. And this. Carbon-free, safe, reliable, affordable, round-the-clock energy that only emits water vapor. We're changing the world of nuclear fuel, so nuclear energy can change the world.
You can see that was done before the Olympics because we have the Canadian hockey team, and we don't like to talk about that anymore. And that's it. So thank you very much. Happy to take any questions if there are any. Yes.
So I can think of 3 things that are holding back nuclear regulation, and you've exposed the third one now: lack of uranium, and the third one. What was the third one? Mass perception. People mass perception. Are there any others, and can you rank those?
I would say mass perception can probably be broken apart a little bit, where like the safety piece of it and the NIMBYism, and then also the economic, who's going to wear the cost. I think the uranium is definitely the highest risk to the whole thing, just because, okay, let's say you sort out the other two. If you haven't that, you're doomed. So a focus on uranium is definitely the key. And in terms of mass perception piece of it, I think, I call it kind of the decade of the renewable experiment. Like when you had these jurisdictions go all in on renewables, like say Germany or something, and then you see the consequences of those. It's not to say that there should be no renewables or there should be only one. There has to be a balanced mix. And so I think what that experiment really showed is that, yeah, people might have a view until they don't have power, or they have rolling brownouts in places like California or New York, where they're sitting there going, well, what the hell are we paying for here? Like, we live in like a very large economy and we don't have power. This is crazy. Why renewables? Why did we have that? Oh, we shut down the nuclear plants. Okay, let's restart them. So I think that one kind of has, obviously there's always going to be skeptics in nuclear. I mean, the Simpsons didn't do us any favors. But I think that's certainly being overcome, and it has come a long, long way, even in the last 12 years since we made the discovery.
So lack of uranium, people mass perception, regulations last?
You need all of them. It's hard to rank them. I would say that orders probably make sense because the regulation isn't prohibitive. You can do it. It's just not as efficient as it could be. And again, this is very jurisdictionally dependent. Like the U.S. now is a lot more efficient. They got efficient really quickly on the nuclear side of it. Canada is working towards that. I would say they're not quite there yet. On the nuclear side, I would say they're getting a bit better. On the fuel side of it, they've got more work to do. So that's kind of depends where you are in the world.
So one more question. I learned about CanGo, the technology that Canada has that uses, I guess, heavy water with unenriched uranium versus all the other technologies that use light water with enriched uranium. Of those technologies, do one use more uranium to provide power than the other?
Not materially. No. Not materially. No.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I'm from Canada, and so I know Ontario's increasing their nuclear generation capacity, talk of small modular reactors across the country and oil sands and so on. I'm not really familiar with the space, so I found it interesting that you said the Western world is at a supply risk. So is Canada, U.S. a net importer of uranium? And is it a significant chunk of the demand of uranium?
I mean, uranium's always a hard one to so on a net basis, Canada would not be a net importer, although, on balance, they probably import a lot just because of diversification needs of the utilities. But the U.S. is a massive one. I mean, it's the most stark example of it. They produce, a couple 100,000 pounds of uranium annually and consume over 50 million pounds annually. And Canada does supply some to that, but they have relied very heavily on Kazakhstan, Russia, and so on. And so that's what's being unwound now.
Any other questions in the pod?
Thank you for your talk. You mentioned that one of the things that need to change is just different regulatory requirements for mining. And you mentioned that setting up your mine took 7 years for just the permitting process to go through. Could you explain a little bit more about what all goes on in that process and what needs to be optimized?
Yeah, so, and look, there's acknowledgement by the federal government of this, but it's very duplicative. So you have, in uranium's case, you have two regulators, a provincial regulator and a federal regulator, which essentially do the exact same thing. In slightly different orders, but effectively the same thing. Like we submit the same document to them, it's reviewed in slightly different ways with different time frames. And so two things really, a single process. That's a very easy one. That's what's been acknowledged by the federal government. I understand they are working towards that. That's really important. And then also, the regulators right now have what they call kind of like guidelines or service standard timeframes, but there's no real accountability around, well, what if it goes longer? So having some kind of like firm timelines of, okay, you have to make a decision by this date. Like, frankly, whatever that time frame is. If they said it's 7 years, it's 7 years. The issue is it's kind of like uncertain the whole way. And so that creates obviously a lot of issue with investors and everyone else in the industry and creates a lot of uncertainty. We need to create more certainty, and there's no reason why we can't. You don't have to take any shortcuts. This isn't about shortcuts. This is about, again, taking two processes that do the same thing in slightly different orders and just combining them into one process. And then saying, okay, you have X amount of time to review it. That's not to say you have X amount of time to approve it. You don't have to approve it at the end of that. It's just something will happen at this time. That gives a lot of certainty.
Can you just talk a little bit more about the scale of Rook I, just how it compares to other discoveries that have been made or other mines that have been tried in the past, and maybe what you think have been the major reasons you all have advanced as far as you have, technologically, commercially, given some of the obstacles you laid out?
Yeah, so as I said before, the mine is capable of being the largest mine of uranium ever. And it'll account for about 25% of global supply, but well over 50% of Western world supply. So that's very, very important. And then our approach to it, And then again, the really important thing with our mine in terms of the differentiation is what I spoke about in terms of where it's held in underground setting. Because not only is it large and other things, but it's in that underground setting, which is very unique. It's not found anywhere else on the planet. So that is the only one. So it's the largest, lowest cost. Why? Well, it's driven by the fact that it's in this underground setting. And then in terms of how we've been able to advance as optimally as we had, I would say that's just really cultural. Our approach is really around, we actually have it on some of our notebooks internally, which is like how it's been done in the past and then crossed out, like we don't care how anything's been done in the past. It's not to say we won't do something the way that it's been done in the past, but that's not a reason to do something. That might sound obvious, but you do get a lot of that in mining, I would say, for sure. So it's really an approach thing with respect to our culture.
It's been a while since I looked at the space, but what's the status of Cigar Lake? Is it producing right now?
It's producing right now, yeah, it is. Cigar Lake, so the two mines in Canada right now are Cigar Lake and McArthur River, owned by Cameco and the French government and some Japanese partners. But that's a great example where those mines were found in the 90s and developed over 20 years ago, and so they're just aging. They're getting old. They're coming to the end of the life, particularly Cigar Lake. And so this is, part of what I talked about in terms of how does NextGen fit in. It really is a story of kind of replacing stuff that's coming offline over the next 5 years, not really addressing that deficit that's here today and certainly growing into the future.
Thank you. Will, from the Colorado School of Mines, we actually helped the Kazakhs set up their mining school at Nazarbayev University. Mm-hmm. When I was over there, I was really struck by how much solution mining they do for uranium.
Yeah.
And I was just curious, is that something that you guys are, that it's something could happen in the deposits that you guys are looking at, or because it seems very, very kind of efficient?
Yeah. So in situ leaching, we would not do that at our mine just because it's not technically feasible because we're in this granite rock, and the way that we're mining it underground is probably the most efficient way to mine anything, which is just essentially bulk underground mining. But uranium is basically split up by, if we remove ourselves, it's really a very challenging business because it's either in situ leaching, which is it can be very challenging. Now the Kazakhs have had, since 2004, this long run, 22 years to kind of figure it out. Now it's going well, but even then, like you ramp down, it's difficult to ramp back up. So you have that situation. I think over 60% of global uranium is produced that way around the world. Or you have the situation like Cigar Lake or McArthur River where you have to literally freeze the ground. You have to mine it with high-powered water jets and everything. It's very complicated, very expensive to do. So you've had these two challenges, and then we came along and found this, which is just like mining a tiny little underground gold mine effectively.
Travis, you're going to stick around for a couple of questions afterwards,
Sure,
I hope?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Excellent. Let's put our hands together for Travis with NextGen Energy.
Thank you.